promote agribusiness incubation and acceleration in Africa. So let's see by show of hands those who have some contribution, comment, question to make. I mean, if you have a comment or question, you can also direct it to a specific person here. As we indicated, ARAM will do the translation for us for our Francophone speakers. So, please. Yes, I see a hand there, and a second one here, and a third one. So let's take the first three there. First, second, and third.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, for the presentation. I'm not sure whether it really fits the 4 areas that you've mentioned, but it's about the distribution, because you're looking at a landscape of incubators across Africa. I wonder whether you also looked at the distribution by commodity, various agricultural commodities, and also by value chain nodes, because I come from the livestock sector, and a lot of these things tend to really neglect livestock or livestock-based commodities, but particularly on the, I would say on the downstream. So a lot of incubation programs that I've seen really tend to work with aggregators, people moving more towards output aggregation and going to make it, and much less with business or on the service and input delivery model. I work for the International Livestock Research Institute, and my biggest struggle is how to get smallholders to adopt technologies that can improve productivity, that would actually touch on the food security concern that you talked about, before they get surpluses to bring to aggregators. Yeah? Right now, I'm working with an incubator in Tanzania where we randomized incubation program for frontline extension and animal health service providers to reorient them to start thinking business so that they can be more inclusive of smallholders. But it was really a struggle getting an incubator who works on that end. Most of the people we found are working more on the upstream side. So whether you looked at that, because I think that's critical given the state where we are starting, yeah. Then the other one is more about, it's more of a comment about financing, or just a question. So if the example that Apple was given, where public institutions put money to build up the infrastructure, why can't we allocate part of this financing to embed, things like guarantee funding that could support incubatees? And that way, because when somebody is paying for the incubator is funded in one way or the other. So getting public finances to address those areas that private financing cannot actually touch, but also working with looking at innovative financing models that allows incubatees to set up business and repay. They don't have to pay up front. So if the financing to set up the business can include the incubation financing, but in a flexible manner so that they pay when the business is mature. But when they fail, the guarantee funding can cover them up. So I think thinking about this in a very blended manner can be, some sort of a solution. Thank you.
Mark, can we try to be brief, Mark, in our interventions? Otherwise, we won't go around the house.
That's right. Okay, so thank you very much for that question and a comment. We come to the second person here, and please.
Yeah, very brief. A very good presentation, really good study. I think it was almost speaking to all of us in a good way. So I see that you have a lot of accent on incubation and less on acceleration. Was there a reason for that? And then secondly, you did a lot of studies for sure. You reach out to a lot. And I just want to know whether with everyone you spoke to, is that incubator or an accelerator that is financially sustainable? Yeah. Maybe I'll just leave those 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. And the third?
Great. Thank you so much. I'm also quite curious on financial sustainability of incubators. What defines that, you know? What are the parameters for sustainability? But two quick comments and questions. I'm just curious. I guess I could read the report as well in details, but if you say South Africa has an agribusiness incubation policy, is that specifically agribusiness or for incubators? Just curious about that. I know that you know, we can share some experience around that with CEDA has something like that. But I'm also curious to understand the figures in South Africa, in aggregate figures of the spread of incubators, especially through like the geographical perspective. So if that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, okay, so let's get responses to these first three comments and questions. So the first one, there was an interest in looking at the geographical distribution, not just in terms of, the geography, but also in terms of value chains, and as well as the different segments of the value chain, starting from the input supply to the end. And then, there was a comment on some de-risking instruments that can be used. The second question, incubation versus acceleration. It appears there's a lot more focus on incubation. And then we have one around the financial sustainability of incubators. Did you find examples, and what are the parameters for that? And specifically for South Africa, is the policy on agribusiness in general or incubation specifically? All right, so over to you, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you. Is the mic on? Can you hear me? Okay, great. All right, so to start with the first question, I think that's very pertinent. We didn't try to disaggregate between different value chains or different commodities. It was basically counting the number of incubators or ESOs in each country. Having said that, what we realized was that most incubators focus not across the spectrum of different agricultural commodities or products, but they actually focus on targeted products which have got good market opportunities in a particular country context. As I mentioned, a lot of the incubators or ESOs don't actually have specialized processing activities, and this also limits the scope of the types of products that they can do. So it's, you know, for each specific commodity or value chain, you need specialized processing equipment or machinery. I think Apollo can also speak to that because his incubator focuses on very specific targeted value chains, and if an incubatee came to Curad and wanted incubation on a different value chain or commodity, I'm not sure if Curad would be in the position to provide that. Having said that, some value chains are easier to manage than others. I think livestock is particularly a challenging one, and it requires a lot of resources. So, there was also quite a lot of talk during the study about incubators helping SMEs to do value chain studies or market feasibility studies for crops and products that they think can have good market opportunities. There are some incubatees who know exactly what they want to do. They go to the incubator and they're like, okay, I want to do honey, or I want to do maize or horticulture or whatever. But there are some who have got a general idea that they would like to get into agripreneurship, they would like to start up their own business, but they need support from the incubator in actually identifying feasible value chains that can have good market potential. On the financing, I think there are opportunities for innovative ways of financing, particularly with things like blended finance, where the public and the private sector come together. Each of them can support one particular aspect of the finance ecosystem. And I also know that in Nigeria and in Ghana, the banks have developed NERSL and GERSL, respectively. And I'd like one of our Ghanaian or Nigerian participants to say more about that, because I'm not completely au fait with what they're doing, but basically it provides incentives and a de-risking mechanism for the private sector to invest. What's the difference between incubation and acceleration? So we didn't really differentiate, because most of the, let's call them ESOs, most of them do both. They provide support for startups, for young entrepreneurs who want to get their business going, so that would be the incubation part. But they also provide services to companies that have become more established, but then don't know how to take the next step in growing. So that's basically the difference that we applied, you know, the difference between incubation and acceleration. And like I say, most of these ESOs do provide opportunities for both, depending on where the entrepreneur is on the spectrum in terms of developing their business. Financial sustainability, that's a good one. I mean, one good example is RaceCore in South Africa, and they're actually a completely privately owned, managed and funded incubator. And they're one of the few on the continent. And they actually seem to be doing very well. And again, we have participants here from South Africa and from NEPAD who can probably say more on that. But it does mean that RaceCore is very selective because it's looking for entrepreneurs who already have a certain skills level, and they do a very thorough screening process. So it also results in quite a high dropout rate. I'm not sure of the numbers. I think it's mentioned in the report, in the study report. But basically, for every, I don't know, 100 entrepreneurs who apply to RaceCore, very few are actually selected. And then they're also expected to pay for the services that they're offered, which is not the case with a lot of other incubators. We came across one public-funded incubator in Uganda, actually, which was totally managed and funded by the government. But the incubatees basically had free services provided, and a lot of them outstayed their welcome because there was no clear cut-off point at which, okay, the incubator has provided such and such a service, and then, you know, they release the incubatee to go and set up the business. So you then find that incubatees stay on in the incubator for a very long period of time, which is a drain on questionable what they're actually getting out of that experience. Incubation policy in South Africa. It is specifically a policy on incubation. Yes. Yeah, it was quite interesting that, you know, 8 countries control 60% of the incubators across the continent. It's difficult to understand the reasons behind that. I think entrepreneurship in certain parts of the continent has been more popular and has taken root over a longer period of time. So hence the reason for their spread, particularly in the East Africa region and in Kenya and Uganda particularly. But bear in mind that countries are a different size. So as I mentioned in the presentation, you know, the fact that Rwanda has fewer Inca is actually completely understandable because it's a much smaller country. So maybe it would be best to use some other metrics such as number of population per incubator. I think I've tried to answer most of the things, but yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for those responses, and also thank you for the questions and comments. We will do another round of comments. I see a hand here, second, third. Before I come to you, the question of financing, please look for this publication, the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, 2024. The focus is on financing to end Food Insecurity and Malnutrition in All Its Forms. It's an FAO publication together with IFAD, WFP. 2024, it focuses on financing. Whilst it doesn't focus specifically on agribusiness incubation, the innovative financial products and recommendations are important, some of which will apply in this context as well. Now, during Stephanie's presentation, she made the point that geographically we see more enterprise support organizations in Anglophone Africa compared with Francophone. So our Francophone colleagues here, you may wish to make a comment on this observation, why you think that is the case, or any other comments you may have around that. And again, as you ask your comment or make your contribution, let us be looking ahead and potentially make some recommendations, come up with what you think we should do going forward, having heard the findings from the report and the discussions which are ongoing. What are some recommendations we can pick from this going forward? Okay, so I had the first one here, second here, there was a third there, and then 4. If we have time, I'll come to you. So please be brief and straight to the point. There, here first, the lady there. Can you pass on the mic to her, please?
Thank you. I would like to take it a step backwards for the layman's person. So we're talking about incubator or accelerator, but how does the layman even know the word incubator? So you are a young startup person, you are a young person aspiring to start a farming project, and then you go and Google how to fund it or funding for farming. The word accelerator, you don't even know it. So where do you find them? It's one thing that you might be in a country where they aren't, but I do live in South Africa. It's one of the countries, and quite frankly, I've never found, and I've Googled. So you would find, so how does one actually know that this exists, and how to find it, and how to approach? Because before we even talk about how the accelerators or incubators can help people, one even needs to know what an incubator is, that the whole concept exists, that is a tool out there, you know, to help the people. So how do we advertise it better? How does it reach the layman, the young person that knows I have a project, I know exactly what farming project I want to do, I have no idea how to start. It's overwhelming, I don't know where to start, but I know I want to do this and I can do this, how to do it.
Okay, thank you. So definitions and dissemination of information on incubation and acceleration. Second, yes.
I wanted to talk about age limits and some of the criteria we set for funding when it comes to some of these DPs and funders. But because she asked for help with Ghana, I'm going to give her the help and maybe defer that my personal comment. So in Ghana, we have GERSAL, which is the Ghana incentive-based risk sharing system for agricultural lending. What GERSAL is doing, AFDB and the Bank of Ghana gave them some seed capital. So they fund agribusinesses and de-risk agri through partner financial institutions. The regular bank will give you a loan at 35% interest, but GERSAL would basically give you a haircut on that interest, and you can get a loan through their partner financial institutions for maybe 10% interest, and sometimes you get maybe a 6-month to 1-year moratorium to invest. And then we have the DBG, which is the Development Bank of Ghana, which is also giving much more affordable funding to the commercial banks to lend to agribusinesses. And now we have a DBG guarantee. And then the whole ecosystem is also being enabled by the Ghana Commodities Exchange to enable proper off-taking arrangements. And then in this mix, there is the Millennium Development Authority I work with, which is de-risking agri through the provision of infrastructure. So that's how Ghana is trying to approach the challenges in agri with all these things. So MIDA, for example, is investing in 110,000 acres of special economic zones, roads, electricity, housing, machinery, everything. Private sector players can apply for land in these spaces. Then you can go to GESA or DBG or any of the partner funds to get cheaper capital. And some of the DPs are also giving working capital supports as grants to some of these things. So that's how generally it's working now in Ghana. It's early stages. GESA is only 5 years. The other institutions are only 5 years old, but we see a big future when the synergy really works and then they fully take off. So I forgo my own comments.
All right, thank you very much. That is a very good input there. We go here for the third question or comments.
Thank you for that presentation. And I am from Kenya, and I saw that Kenya is leading in the number of incubators. But like the comment from a South African lady, that if you throw a stone, you are likely to get an incubator. And I just wanted to know, when FAO was doing this research, did you have a criteria or a description of who is an incubator? Because I would be interested to get some of the names of the Kenyan incubators, and what did you look for to call them incubators? Because as my colleague there said, is incubation only for those who are already in businesses, or literary incubation like starting these youths and maybe even women who want to be in agribusiness by even changing their mindsets and taking them through all the issues of agribusiness, so that from there maybe you can push them to agribusiness when they already have the knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we come here for the fourth question.
Thank you. So my recommendations are this, right? For someone who started one of the first hubs in Nigeria in 2013, I mean, just right after renovation, I think that there's so much that needs to be done, or rather not so much that needs to be done around, hubs setup. Because almost everyone who founded it was founding it based on the premises of, raising the next unicorn or billionaire. But having run hubs for over a decade, I have found out that we are missing on the most important things. If we create a system to support very early stage businesses, right? Very, very early stage. And this is very important, because many African startups or ventures or business people who went through incubation did not go through it because of research. They went through it based on pain, because not many of them could understand research, right? I would say that across Africa, many of the research-backed innovation hubs I've seen is from South Africa. I can't remember where Sibanda was. I can't remember where McLean Sibanda was back in the days. But those were the guys who were doing more research-backed incubators. And so now Africa has shifted from this quick fast food, type of startup level. We can never get where we are if we continue in this model. So I will say that for us to be able to move forward, let's create a system where we can really finance incubation. And incubation cannot be 3 weeks. Incubation cannot be 4 weeks. At least it should be 6 months. Or 9 months. Because if you're building a product, let's not just fry eggs and fry burger and just throw it out, right? Okay. Let's really cook something that is very important. So let's make up a resource to help without having to invest in it. And so there's a need for very early stage financing, and then we should consider power. The reasons why incubators cannot thrive in Africa, energy cost is very high. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me take the last one from the gentleman at the back, and then we get the responses.
Yes, thanks for giving me the floor. I would like to touch on that important part where you compared French-speaking countries, versus English-speaking countries in Africa. I just wanted to highlight the fact that the problem with French-speaking countries is the colonial past that we had in our education system. Our education system is more admin-centric, where people view agriculture and other as, dirty jobs, compared to the English-speaking countries where they put more emphasis on entrepreneurship and practical stuff. I think policymakers should work a little bit to harmonize in such a way that the curriculum in the education systems take into consideration that, you know, we have 70% of those Arab lands in Africa, and we can put them to use. That is one thing that that we can do. And the funding is also extremely important, as he mentioned, because in French-speaking countries, there's no culture of funding something that you cannot see, that's not tangible. Will your result in a...
Okay, thank you very much. So, very insightful comments and questions there. We had one which states that we need to disseminate more, disseminate information on agribusiness incubation, acceleration. People need to know to be able to find what is there. So dissemination of information is important. I'll come to Stephanie and the financing scheme in Ghana, which is in fact fashioned after what was started in Nigeria, which is called NESL. So there are specific de-risking instruments. So I think the point there is to what extent can we direct some of these de-risking instruments to support agribusiness incubation and acceleration. There was a comment or question on the criteria for incubators, especially in the Kenyan context, to get to know who really are those who were identified in Kenya. Then, the importance of very early stage financing, which has been identified as a gap. That was also a comment. And for the issue regarding the Francophone countries vis-a-vis the Anglophones, the point is that we need to look at the education policy, specifically on the curriculum, to make some reforms there to place a bit more emphasis on the practical aspects of entrepreneurship. Okay, so let me come to Stephanie, and then let me first go to Apollo for brief concluding comments. Aaron, they didn't use you, but that's perfectly fine. So very brief concluding comment if you have any, then I'll come to Stephanie also to make brief responses and comments.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I'll use the brief one to maybe add to the issue of sustainability of incubation centers that was raised by one of the perspectives as far as incubation is concerned. As an incubation center, you can be sustainable supporting 20 incubatees annually that could earn you enough and the staff and support 20 entrepreneurs. When I have scope and capacity to support 1,000 entrepreneurs and ensure they get a job and an income, that will make me unsustainable and it will send me out to look for money to be able to physically that.
Thank you very much. So when we are discussing sustainability, let's look at scale. Right, Stephanie.
Thank you. To start with your first question, how do you find an incubator? So maybe I can just tell you about the approach that we tap into. Plus, we also managed to solicit additional information through RU Forum, which is the regional universities. I'm sure you're familiar with RU Forum, but I can't remember the full name of the acronym. But basically, it's a network of universities that provide, in Africa, that provide agricultural and agribusiness training and support. We also worked with AIN, the African Agribusiness Incubators Network. So through all this networking and partnerships, we were able to actually identify quite a number of incubators. We also did an extensive internet search to identify them. But let me tell you something interesting. So a lot of the incubators that we actually contacted, either by email or by phone or whatever, we didn't get a reply. So the question is, you know, they may be there on paper, but are they there in reality? So that's one of the issues. I think there are some very established incubators, you know, that have been around for quite a few years, and I think they have a higher profile and higher visibility. But bear in mind that incubation in Africa is a relatively recent phenomenon. So some of these incubators, they've only been around for a short period of time. Okay, so it does make it challenging to find them. I think it would be really useful if the responsible ministries or agencies, whether it's ministries of agriculture or trade and industry, were able to keep, or agribusiness units within these ministries, were able to keep an updated database with information on the various incubators and enterprise support organizations in their countries, so that when an entrepreneur comes to the ministry, asks for information, where can I apply for incubation, you know, they get the information in one place. That doesn't really exist at the moment, but I think it would be very useful in improving communication. Criteria for what is an incubator or what isn't an incubator. So again, a very good point. And I think during the presentation I mentioned that, you know, there were so many different models and structures that we came across. Some of them we eliminated because we felt that they weren't actually providing any kind of incubation services to entrepreneurs. But then there were a lot of others that adopted different approaches. And so that's why we preferred to use the more generic term enterprise support organizations, because that includes incubators, it includes accelerators, and includes various other organizations that are there to support young entrepreneurs. Again, this differentiation between incubation and acceleration, I think it relates to this question of supporting early business startups. In my mind, that's incubation. And when a company then establishes itself and it wants to take the next step in terms of growth, that is acceleration. But there's a fine line between the two. And that's why I think the term ESO covers all eventualities. I just wanted to make one other point about the incubators that we've met. Actually, an important part of incubation is mentorship. And that was often difficult to find in the incubators because a lot of the staff of incubators, particularly the ones that are housed within universities, consist of university lecturers and professors and people without real private sector experience. And I'm not taking away anything from these people, you know, they're very accomplished in their own fields, in their own areas. But the question is, are they really the right type of people to provide mentorship and business training, entrepreneurship training to the incubatees? Good point about energy cost. I think that's a really critical issue. Again, this is where it comes into the policy domain, and how do governments provide that kind of supportive ecosystem for small businesses to flourish, and how can those small businesses actually compete against larger, often international companies that have got a lot of the resources, both in terms of finance and technology and management skills at their fingertips. Thank you, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephanie. So as we conclude, I want to highlight a few points. One, let's disseminate information on agribusiness incubation and acceleration. Two, some of the financing instruments that are there, channel some of that towards very early stage financing for agribusiness incubation. 3, look at the curricula in education and place a bit more emphasis on entrepreneurship, especially within the Francophone context. And then mentorship as part of the incubation. Let the mentorship come from the practitioners for these incubatees and incubators. All right, so with that, let's end it here. And let's thank Stephanie. Okay.
All right, that would be the very last question.
Okay, so let us have the very last one.
Yes, actually, it is more like a question because I hear about incubators and accelerators, but you did not mention, actually, there is a kind of accelerators that are more on the financial side, you know, rather than, or they're a little bit more integrated, like in Senegal, West Africa, you have the My Agro. I'm sure you know about them. How can we actually scale up this kind of initiative? It's kind of NGO and at the same time a business, and what they do is providing financing, but on the condition that you start saving your money, and they use technology, you know, and they use a very accessible technology instead of just using an app. They use actually the USSD, which in rural area it's a little bit much more, I would say, accessible, affordable. You don't need to download an app, and you don't even need to go through the complication. People usually think that app is easy. It's not easy for everyone. Okay, Facebook may be easy for everyone, but not all those professional apps, because the designers won't spend the amount of time, actually designers of those social network actually spend, because they are being paid for that. Small initiatives don't have this amount of money to pay for designers who will make things easier. That's why USSD is quite easy. And I saw in South Africa recently they launched an e-wallet which is based on the USSD, because I think they understood. So how can we scale up initiatives like My Agro, you know, that provides access for you to save, then you can borrow, and then they will use as well their technology and their systems to provide you advice as a farmer, share with you meteorological informations, provide you as well access to seed, and so on and so forth. So how can we actually scale up this kind of initiative? Because me, I consider them as an accelerator, but accelerator for small-scale farmers.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Accelerator for small-scale farmers. How can we scale up these context-specific initiatives? Who wants Apollo? Okay. You have the mic, yeah. Very briefly. Would you want to comment?
I think we have some kind of divergent, convergent innovation coming up. Different regions and countries tend to have, now having similar activities, but modeled differently. I could just say in Uganda we have the NSSF Accelerator program. It is, as you said, financial. But now this one focuses on enterprises that are already running. So we got a grant of about $20,000. The only payback is you save with a social security fund. So one you just mentioned probably is looking at SME, like smallholder farmers. This one is now looking at SMEs that are growing, and I mean they've just started off and they can use $20,000 to upscale. So I think we're having different models coming up across the continent. Perhaps AUDA-NEPAD could take this up and see how this can be scaled up and down the continent, because you have that coming together to look at the SMEs. We could have the social security fund model going across the continent. I think we pass this on to NEPAD and AUDA to take it on.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Stephanie, you want to make a comment on that?
Thanks. I think it's a very good question. One thing that I've noticed is that small companies, okay, when we talk about acceleration, it's no longer a very small company, it's maybe, a medium-sized companies. They don't have networks and associations, and I think they could really increase their visibility if they had platforms, either at national level or maybe even at regional level, because that would give greater visibility. It would allow advocacy with government for enabling policies, including access to finance. And I also think that a lot of these visibility events or investment events are really important, and I wish there were more of them. So one example is the what do they call it? B2B business room. And I know a lot of deals are made during that week when AGRA holds this event, and smaller companies pitch to larger ones. There are a lot of B2B meetings, bilateral meetings, and there could be more of these events. FAO has also started work in this area, holding investment fora, both at national and regional level. And it's an opportunity for big companies and smaller companies to network and to explore commonalities and how they can actually work together better, and maybe what benefits the smaller companies could also derive from working with these larger ones. So just to...
Yep. Let me ask...
yes, please. Yeah, let me grant you brief.
Can you come in and give a few concluding remarks in French?
Okay.
Yes.
So before I come in French...
Now that you've asked for the mic.
Okay, before I come in French, I would like to address the last questions. Okay. I think we need to act at two levels. The first one should be at policy level, where we kind of create networks for these small and medium enterprises, like what we are doing here now. Because this network, they can leverage on those networks for knowledge exchange and also for scaling up. The second thing is to help those small-scale businesses have what we can call business development support, either from those who are already advanced in the business or from development partners.
Qui sont au Sénégal doivent certainement le connaître. Et puis j'ai pris la liberté qui ne produisent pas suffisamment parce que il y a un vrai problème de capacité financière.